Alright, today we're doing a video all about American towns, but more specifically, creepy American towns. A creepy underbelly. They're not creepy on the outside, but they got some dark history going on. Alright, let's get right into it. We're gonna start things off with Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Pretty much every American in the audience knows exactly why this place is said to be one of the most haunted towns in the United States. Gettysburg is known for two things: its pivotal role in the American Civil War and its reputation as one of the most haunted places in the US, which those two basically go hand in hand. Back in July of 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg raged for 3 days, leaving behind a trail of devastation and death. It was one of the deadliest battles of the Civil War, with thousands of soldiers from both Union and Confederate armies losing their lives on the field. Now, fast forward to today, and you've got a town with a lot of history and a lot of ghost stories. People claim to have seen apparitions of soldiers wandering the battlefield, and then you also have all the stories about the sounds. You know, sounds of phantom gunfire and cannon blasts, or eerie drumming in the distance coming from nowhere. But the ghostly activity isn't just relegated to the battlefield. Many of the buildings in Gettysburg are said to be haunted as well. Hotels like the Farnsworth House Inn and the Gettysburg Hotel are rumored to have ghosts. And of course, some have said they've seen ghostly soldiers roaming the Gettysburg National Cemetery. Some say the sheer amount of death and suffering from that battle left a spiritual imprint, if you will, on the land, causing it to be a magnet for paranormal activity. Others think that the trauma and unfinished business of the soldiers who died there keeps them stuck between the world of the living and the dead, unable to find peace. Now we move on to Savannah, Georgia. Just like with Gettysburg, this town is well known for what went down during the Civil War, but there are lots of other dark parts about its past. Let's start with disease. Like many cities in the past, Savannah has faced outbreaks of deadly diseases, most famously yellow fever. Back in the day, the yellow fever swept through the city, taking countless lives. Then there were the fires. Savannah has experienced several devastating fires throughout its history, like the Great Savannah Fire of 1820, which destroyed a lot of the city's original buildings. And of course, there were the battles. Savannah played a big role in both the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. A lot of important battles were fought here. Now, as for the hauntings themselves, well, they're everywhere. Savannah is filled with historic buildings and landmarks that are said to be haunted. Places like the Sorrel Weed House, Colonial Park Cemetery, and Moon River Brewing Company are all said to have ghosts and paranormal activity going on. Let's head over to Canada now, the town of Quesnel. Now, this quaint town in British Columbia looks pretty charming, and I'm sure it is, but there's also a malevolent menace lurking within it, that of a cursed doll. We all love a good haunted doll story, right? The doll's name is Mandy, and it sits in the Quesnel District Museum and Archives. It was given to the museum in 1991 by a woman who just wanted to get rid of the thing, saying it gave her a weird feeling. The doll is over 100 years old at this point, and yeah, taking a look at it, not surprised she wanted this abomination out of her house. The thing looks like it's actually trying to look haunted, like not hiding at all. Well, one story goes that the day the museum received the doll, it was taken to a lab in the building to be photographed. The staff left the doll in the room, closing up for the night, and when they came back the next day, the room was in total disarray. And people who visit the museum also say they feel as if Mandy's eyes follow them as they walk. And people have even said they have technical issues with their camera while trying to film the doll. It'll just run out of battery, or they won't be able to film, but they can film in other places in the museum. It's very strange. Alright, again in Canada, we have Banff, Alberta. Banff is said to have one of the most haunted hotels in the country, Fairmount Banff Springs. One of the most famous spirits said to roam the halls is Sam the Bellman. Sam worked at the hotel for years before he died in 1975, and he always joked that he'd come back to haunt the place, and some guests claim he's made good on that promise. they've reported being helped by an elderly Scottish man in old-fashioned clothes who disappears as soon as you turn around. Elevator doors have also been known to open and close for no reason, which staff often say is Sam fooling around. Now, he seems kind of fun and harmless, but there's also the tale of the doomed bride. The story goes that a bride fell down a flight of stairs to her death just before her wedding. Some guests claim to have seen her ghostly figure dancing alone in the hotel's ballroom, which just gives me the creeps. Can't say I really believe in ghosts, just I don't have any experiences with them myself. I really want to though, but something about a ghost, or even just a living person for that matter, dancing alone, silently, in the middle of the night in a big room, it's just spooky. Reminds me of that scene in The Haunting of Hill House where Eleanor's dancing all alone in the old decrepit family home, but in her mind everything is all happy and joyous. You know the scene if you've watched it. You gotta watch Haunting of Hill House. Creepy. Next on the list we have Quebec City. This is the second oldest city in Canada, so it has a lot of history, and you can tell as soon as you set foot there. It's all cobblestone roads and old buildings. A really beautiful town. It also is known as one of Canada's most haunted cities, and Les Chateaux Frontenac may be the most haunted spot in the city. There are a number of ghosts said to roam the hallways here, but one of them tends to sneak into guests' beds, and I can't say I've heard that one before. I've heard of ghosts standing in corners staring at people in bed, or hovering over people's beds, or just making strange sounds in people's rooms at haunted hotels, but to actually climb into bed with people, like that's bold. That's a whole other level. Imagine waking up and you're in bed and you gotta chill, and then you turn over and you just see a ghost cuddled up next to you in bed. It's, you know what, that's kind of nice. Next we have New Orleans. This is a town I've always wanted to go to. It's so full of history, so rich in culture, but part of that history is pretty dark and creepy. There are so many haunted spots, so many dark tales. We've done a whole video on haunted places in New Orleans alone. Definitely check that video out. But after this one, of course, a few heavy hitters are the Lalaurie Mansion, the former home of an evil French socialite named Delphine Lalaurie, who fled the city after it was discovered she'd tormented and mutilated several slaves she owned, performing twisted experiments on them. Pretty much every cemetery in New Orleans is said to be haunted as well, especially St. Louis Cemetery, and of course, you have all the history involving voodoo. Not saying the practice is evil by any means, but it does add to the general spookiness and vibe of the town. Next on the list, we have the town of St. Elmo. St. Elmo in Chappie County, Colorado, now sits completely abandoned. But in its heyday, it was a bustling mining town filled with dreams of gold and silver. Founded in the late 1800s, St. Elmo was your standard town for the time. You had general stores, saloons, but as the mining started to dry up over the years, so did the town's population. And by the 1920s, it was practically a ghost town. And I say practically because it wasn't completely abandoned. Meet Annabelle Stark, better known as Dirty Annie, a woman who refused to leave St. Elmo. Alongside her brother Tony, who grappled with mental health issues, Annabelle was one of the last residents of the town, which, with each passing year and dwindling community, Tony's mental state started spiraling further into isolation-induced madness, often seen wandering the desolate streets lost in his own thoughts. The two were surrounded by decaying buildings and homes, but Annabelle was determined to cling to their family home and the memories that it held. And some say that as the town emptied, Annabelle and Tony were the sole inhabitants. And today, when you visit the ghost town, it's said you just might see the ghostly presence of Dirty Annie, still wandering the empty, moonlit streets, guarding the town from the afterlife. Next up, we have Bannack, Montana. This place might look like your average ghost town now, but back in the day, it was anything but ordinary. Founded in 1862 when gold was discovered in Grasshopper Creek, it quickly became the very definition of a Wild West town, attracting a whole lot of folks hoping to strike it rich. But where there's gold, there's usually trouble, and Bannack was no exception. The place was full of shootouts, stagecoach robberies. Just picture the type of place from old Western movies where one guy punches another guy in a saloon and then everyone in the whole place starts beating each other up for no apparent reason. The place was so corrupt and crime-filled that even the town's sheriff, Henry Plummer, was secretly leading a gang of outlaws. But folks in Bannack weren't about to sit back and let these outlaws run the show. They had enough of the lawlessness, so they formed what they called the Vigilance Committee. And one night they rounded up over 20 members of the gang, including Plummer himself, and strung them up. Didn't really solve the problem as more outlaws rolled in, but as the gold started to run out and people moved on to other mining opportunities, Bannack faded into history. And these days, it's a ghost town in every sense of the word. Over 60 historic buildings are still standing, and as you can probably guess, yes, the place is said to be haunted. Jerome, Arizona. At one point, Jerome was a bustling mining town, buzzing with activity, teeming with miners, but there was also a lot of tragedy here. Jerome had its fair share of accidents, mine collapses, explosions, and where there's danger and tragedy, there's often said to be ghosts. Today, Jerome is known as one of the most haunted towns in America. People claim to have seen all sorts of stuff. Ghostly apparitions wandering the streets to strange lights flickering in the abandoned mines. One of the most famous haunted spots in Jerome is the Jerome Grand Hotel. Back in the day, it was a hospital for miners, and it's said to be haunted by the spirits of those who died there. Guests report hearing strange noises, feeling cold spots, and even seeing apparitions in the hallways. And it just wouldn't feel right talking about towns in North America with dark histories without bringing up Salem, Massachusetts. This place has such a dark history behind it that just the name alone, Salem, is just ominous. It evokes these feelings in you. The Salem witch trials are one of the darkest chapters in American history, and part of what makes the whole conundrum so creepy is that it kind of popped up out of nowhere. Witch trials had been a thing for hundreds of years in Europe, but they'd started to wane at this point in the late 1600s. Some of these superstitious beliefs carried over with settlers in the States though, and when young girls in the village started acting strange, having fits, screaming and saying they were being tormented by witches, things quickly spiraled out of control. The accusations spread very fast, like wildfire, and soon dozens of people, mostly women, but also some men, were accused of being witches. People were just pointing fingers left and right, making baseless claims. Anyone who seemed just a little different or rubbed someone the wrong way could find themselves in serious trouble if they were accused of witchcraft. And how do you really prove someone is a witch? You don't. It was just people's word against each other's. And in the end, 19 people were hanged and some died while awaiting trial. It's one of the worst cases of mass hysteria and paranoia in history. And with all that said, I've been your host, James, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.